So what I will say is your sensitivity is meant to increase. So that's a good thing. And a funny thing happens, or at least this is how it's happened for me, and you may resonate with this. I have found that as my sensitivity to energy increases, it's a sign that my spiritual capacity to work with energy has increased. So it seems like the opposite. When we think about sensitivity in our more traditional understanding of that term, we tend to think that we are less strong. But I've actually found on a spiritual perspective, it's the other way. So the more your sensitivity grows, the more you are actually opening to the divine realms. And there's this funny thing that happens where you probably feel like you are doing less. But if you're an energy worker, for example, or just simply those around you, they are receiving more from you because you are more open. So you will feel smaller and smaller and more merging with that energy. And you may think like, gosh, this is a lot. Have I actually got weaker or less able to cope? What's actually happening is you're merging more because your capacity is increasing, and those around you will be feeling it more strongly. Now, the other thing we have to be careful about is not apply outside thinking overly to inside processes. So your inside process, and this has certainly happened for me, may mean that you do less energy work, but more strongly and more effectively with that increasing sensitivity. There was a time I remember when I was doing like 10 plus hours a day of readings many years ago, when I was doing that. There is no way I would do that now. It just wouldn't be right for my energy field or how I work with energy now. So that changes what you're capable of doing, and how you want to work will change as your sensitivity evolves. That's a good thing. Spirit will show you ways to make that work for you in a pragmatic sense in the world. So you don't have to worry about that or think, oh, I'm not going to, if that's your work, or it will evolve. So I pray for help around that if that's something that's of concern. But know that Spirit's always going to be working with you, because as we kind of sense today with Lolita, there is this beautiful divine energy that wants you to thrive and survive. So keep doing your practice. Don't push yourself. Sometimes less is more in terms of timing. So don't push to stay caught up with the lives. That will happen naturally when the time is right. Just dive in and out as feels best for you. And if you are finding that you're getting signs that you're overdoing it, and for me, generally that means I get really super tired. I feel cranky. I feel the kind of energetic version of what happens if you overtrain physically. I don't know if you've ever done that. But you're kind of in the high in the moment, you feel amazing and you just keep going. And then the next day you're like, oh, and you not feel good. Your nervous system's like, well, what did you do to me, woman? Like, that was way too much. So you learn how to kind of find your threshold, and the same way you would with physical exercise, how to push a little bit faster, you're going to get change, but not so much that you're going to wear yourself out. And that's just learning your own energy language. And that's part of what we're learning together as a community in this space too. So listen to yourself, give yourself the rest that you need, work with your body, know that increasing sensitivity is good. It's not a sign of anything negative. It's actually just a sign that you're growing. And if you're not feeling that, don't worry, because sometimes we don't know that it's happening until years later. And suddenly we look back and think, oh my goodness, I can really see the change. So it can happen gradually. I hope that's a helpful start. Yeah, look, I'm not really going to be one who probably says things that most people agree with. And I think this would definitely be a case of that. I love tattoos. I'm all for them. I don't have a problem with it interfering with our energy. In fact, I'm sort of covered in them, but it's intentional. So for me, I actually wanted to connect with those, bija, symbols of the deity. So I had a moment trying to think of two things at once. They're symbols of the deity. So when I got them, I actually had the intention that they were going to increase that presence for me. So that works for me. But I know that many teachers in many different traditions don't like them and feel that they will interfere. I don't have that belief. So basically what this boils down to is, I would say for you, intuit and feel what feels right for you in this situation and go with that. Yeah, I hope that's helpful. Amazing question. I have to say, if you want to hear about enlightenment, there are far more qualified teachers like the Dalai Lama, for example, to look for that. But I will share what I feel I can in this moment that might be beneficial. And to answer that question, I'm going to share with you this odd little story about a realized Lama that I met at the end of 2022 in South India. And he's not very famous, except in the Tibetan community he is, but outside of that community, no one really knows about him in the West and whatever. So I met this teacher and received teachings from him. And what struck me about him was that on the 4 different occasions I saw him in 4 different roles. I met him first when he was doing an impromptu talk for the group of Western people. There's about 20 of us that had come from different parts of the world, along with these 800 Tibetan monks sitting in this like Tibetan settlement area in South India to receive teachings. And he came to talk to us and give us a bit of a discussion about what was going to happen. So there was that. And then he was going to do the actual teachings. He was the Vajra master for the teachings. And what struck me is I didn't recognize him, right? He looked completely different to me. And then we went and had a private audience with him. And it was the same thing. I was like, who's that? And everyone's like, this is the person. Like, what's wrong with you? And so it happened a few times in different ways. And every time he looked completely different. I was like, what's wrong with me? Why does he look like when he was giving the discourse, like informally, he was just like, oh, I'm, tired today. And he gave the discourse and he was sitting on the ground. He said, this is probably crap because I haven't prepared it, but I'll do my best for you. And then when he was doing the teachings, he's on a high throne with all these, 1,000 people doing the, mantras with him. And he looked like completely different. And then when he was in his private room doing the private audience to give a blessing, he looked completely different again. And it was when I finally, because that was towards the end, the private audience, I realized what was going on. And I had this moment where I looked at him and there was no difference between his energy and the air around him. None. It wasn't like you see me, you can sort of see my body and you can have a sense of the air. There was nothing. I was fascinated by this. And I suddenly thought of this description of the enlightened mind that comes from, I think it's from the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying, actually. But they talk about the air inside, like imagining a glass vase, and the air inside the vase and the air outside the vase suddenly are recognized as being the one thing. So this whole idea of separation, like if you imagine the vase is our consciousness or our sense of self or our mind, is completely transcended. And I thought, what I'm seeing with this being, this human, and why he looks different every time is because there's no self that's no sense of self, no identity that's limited and continuous. It's just when he's doing impromptu teaching, he's doing impromptu teaching. When he's doing this, he's doing that. When he's in the privacy of his room and he's just doing blessings, he's doing that. And there was this sense that there's no obstruction whatsoever between him and what is happening in that moment. He's entirely at one with it, which is why he looked completely different to me, even though I thought it was a bit nuts. But later I thought, no, I'm just seeing his energy and the fact that there is no obstruction at all. So from that, and when he talked, and this is the other thing, enlightened teachers, and I've met a few, they're never, and you just know, and they're never the ones that say that they are. That's my experience. I'm not saying that that's a hard and fast rule, but just in my experience, they never say that they are. In fact, when he talked about his level of realization, and they all tend to do this, he was just like, well, I've kind of purified the 3 poisons. Like it's just this basic thing that he was saying, but it's so huge. It's like the 3 poisons are he's completely conquered hatred and anger, ignorance, and attachment and desire. And he's just saying it like, oh, well, I cleaned my kitchen. Like it was this casual thing. And I was like, oh my God, that's incredible. He said, I don't know how much authority I have to do this, but I've done that bit at least. So that is a very kind of informal way of answering your question about what enlightenment is. Now, how we get there, one thing that this teacher said, and the Dalai Lama, who's probably the preeminent Western teacher on enlightenment from that Buddhist tradition at least, say how important compassion is. And he used the term bodhicitta. Bodhicitta just means the mind of the bodhisattva. And the bodhisattva, if we talk about Kuan Yin, for example, is the emanation of beneficial energies that are going to help all beings. That's what it is. So compassion, I would say, is our most accessible path to enlightenment. And compassion is sometimes considered empathy, but it's a little bit more than that. Compassion is the ability to witness with clarity. And when we witness with clarity, there's a natural kindness and care that arises because we see how another being is suffering. And the beauty with this is there's a few things that make this really powerful and why it's worth doing. Learning how to hold that space for ourselves, learning how to hold that space for others. It helps us get out of judgment. And I don't know about you, but judging to me just feels icky. I don't like it. When it comes up, I deal with it, but I don't enjoy it. And I like to move out of that state as swiftly as I can, just to free up my energy so I can be more present and more able to deal with the situation at hand in a constructive way. So when you see something with total clarity, when you see someone suffering, you'll know it because it's just like hearing a true note being sung. It's right on point. And sometimes you will find, even if you don't say anything, but you're just sitting with someone and they're talking, or you're witnessing something and you witness with compassion, it is the most intimate thing. And sometimes people don't like it. And it's not that you're doing it as some power play to make people uncomfortable. It's actually coming from a good place. But the reason that sometimes people, you know, get a bit like not liking it is because they're really being seen. And if they have shame or fear, which most of us do at some level, being seen in such an open way can, you know, trigger feelings of fear around being judged or whatever. It's often not completely conscious, but there can be, it's almost like a squirming to get out of the spotlight that just reveals it so clearly. But it's not like a surgical, you know, uncontrolled lighting. It's a loving space and there's a kindness in it. So that can sometimes settle that. But my point is compassion as a method, coming into the heart and just asking to see. And you can use empathy as a tool. What, you know, my grandmother used to say to me, you know, walk another mile in a person's shoes. You know, so you can use that idea. What would it be like to be that person? What might have happened to cause them to behave that way? You can use that as a technique to get you into that compassionate state. The other thing I often do is ask myself, would I want to be that person in this moment? And that helps me put myself in their shoes. And normally it can be like, oh gosh, not really. And when I think about why, that's when I think, oh, because they're suffering in this way or that way. And it takes you into compassion. So that's hopefully the beginning of an answer to that very beautiful question. Any situation or relationship in your life that's difficult, and if you have a disordered personality or addiction happening, then that person's going to have a lot of suffering. And that in turn is going to probably make it a difficult relationship to be in. It's going to be challenging. So what I would say to you is focus on yourself and where you are struggling in the process. So have compassion for your own struggles. Get clear about what your struggles are. What's difficult for you in that? Find the ways to get support for that. When you are taking care of yourself and your own needs, you'll be able to show up to that relationship or that situation or workplace or whatever the example might be. You'll be able to show up in that relationship in a way where you feel like you have that support for yourself. But sometimes when things are severe, it can pull focus. And especially if we're coming from that kind place, we kind of get caught up in what is happening over here. One of the best things you can do, and it might seem counterintuitive, and it might kind of play into this fearful conditioning we have around not wanting to be selfish, but what's that thing? An empty cup can't quench anyone's thirst, right? So you come back, figure out how to fill yourself and how to find that support, and you'll show up in that different way. And you know that it can be difficult, and be kind to yourself. Yeah, I'm sending love for you and for that. Okay, so that's a beautiful question. Let's apply it generally. So it could be with Tara or any goddess. And it could be for any kind of major transition in your life. It could be anything. It could be a smaller change that you're making. How do we work with the divine ones to kind of facilitate that change and find our way? And I'd say two things. First of all, honor the transition as much as the ending and the official new beginning, because the transition is part of that. It's like the pause between the inhalation and the exhalation. Those things don't happen without the pause. So it's that third element. So be comfortable in that. Give yourself time to reorient and recognize that it's not always, you know, straight out of something into the next thing. That whole process of change does require this willingness to kind of be in that that discomfort that we were talking about earlier today. And that's where that magic is, remember, in not really knowing what the next step is and having had the courage to step out of something, or to even be considering stepping out of something, required the ability to reframe, to think this is not the only reality that's possible. There could be another reality. I don't know what it is yet necessarily, but I'm willing to step towards something in the with the intention and the openness that it be an improvement. So this is good. You've already done this. You'll be applying that again and again and again throughout the journey. In terms of how you work with the divine ones to facilitate this, just pull them into your life. Connect with them like you would a friend. Let's use that example again of the friend that you talk to on the phone, or you find some little meme on social media and you think, oh, they'd like this. It's their sense of humor, and you send it to them. You just maintain some kind of simmering intention for connection. It doesn't have to be, it could be that you have this friend that you just talk to religiously every day. That's just kind of, you've done it since school and you keep doing it, whatever it is. You find your pace and your rhythm with the goddess or the divine ones that you resonate with, and you bring that through in your practice. So it might be a morning prayer. It might be an evening dance or some meditation that you do. It might be just that you put a little thing on your phone, a timer reminder. Drink water, pray to Tara. And it comes up every 2 hours or whatever. And it's 30 seconds. You have a drink of water. You might think, Goddess Tara, bless this water. Have a drink. You just have a moment, and that's it. And all you're doing is just gently reaffirming the divine relationship until it starts to become part of how you think and how you feel. And it's just there with you always, which is very natural, not as hard as it may seem. You may have already had some experience of this. I live with this and have lived with this for many, many years, so I know it's possible. And it just becomes part of you. And then the idea of practicing or anything like that is as simple in your own mind as picking up the phone and speaking to your friend, and you ask for help. That's a really powerful question. And I think that if we recognize two things, hatred is an energy. It's kind of a distorted energy where love has been a bit contaminated by fear. I think that's what that is. So if we recognize that's what it is, we don't have to perhaps resist it so much as have a sense of, okay, how do I respond to this? How do I want to deal with it? And there are a few approaches to this. Witnessing is a great thing to do. I think it's really important also to know if there are ongoing sources that are triggering this in you. So if it's a relationship or a particular dynamic at work, or you find that it's connected to something, then think of it a little bit like you need to create some space for a wound to be healed. So you don't want to keep pouring a poison into a wound, for example. You want to be able to like put a Band-Aid over it, preferably stop the poison from coming in so that wound can heal. And then when you're exposed to it again, because hatred exists in the world and will flow in and out of our minds at different times until we reach that purified, enlightened stage where we've kind of mastered it. But what do we do in the interim? We need to learn how to work with it. So putting that Band-Aid, putting that space might be therapeutic support, seeing a healer. It might be finding a way to set a stronger boundary with whatever that incoming source is. If it's not really external and it's just internal stuff that's coming up, then lots of kindness, bit of therapy, maybe even if you're drawn to Buddhist practices, getting an initiation in an energy practice that works specifically for that. So any of the wrathful deities in the Tibetan tradition, there's Yamantaka, and there's also Singamukha, the wrathful Dakini. So those are possibilities. If you want something to make a commitment to do, it's usually like a 45-minute practice most days, if not daily, if you want to do that commitment. Otherwise, there are other ways to deal with this. But recognize it's about filtering out the fear, stopping the inflow if that's what's triggering it, making it worse, and giving yourself a chance in safe, loving space to begin to unpack that and find out what the fear is and how to reclaim the love. But know that it's something that's just passing through you. So it's like that image, I've used it before, but it's like a cloth that's got a stain in it. You're not the stain, you're the cloth. That's the soul. You wash the practice through and the stain starts to dislodge. So don't identify with it. Don't resist it. Just recognize it. It's an energy that just needs to be cleared out a little bit, and have compassion if you can for yourself and for the source that it's coming from, because hatred is really where our compassion has just got a bit limited. And it's an opportunity to grow our compassion more. It's not always easy in the moment. It's not a comfortable feeling to feel, but you don't have to be freaked out by it. But if it is happening consistently, you need to set stronger boundaries and give yourself some space to be able to heal.